Hello, Theiss. You really went out to the land of some of my favorite fantasy creatures and didn't even invite me, didn't you? I'm kidding. I was busy enjoying myself in Austria when you were there. I quite like the pictures you took of the countryside. Thank you for sending them. So, instilling a required language from an early age seems you have done nothing for helping the language thrive? What a shame. But was that your goal? Were you trying to revive the language, or were you trying to reinstate old languages as the predominant language again? What harm in there is letting a language lay stagnant? What if the native speakers don't want to preserve the history, or don't care? What does it matter then? That isn't to say they don't matter, of course. Language is important in the world. Just food for thought, I suppose. I don't mean to be mean, Theiss. I'm tired and maybe not thinking the best. It's currently about midnight here. I'm in the Maldives, and I've been out all day in the sun working on my tan. I wanted to make the most of the day, and stayed out for a while since my plane came in late. You know those days, right? Days where you start late and end up late and tired? I'm sending the pictures I've taken so far to you. There's quite a stack. I hope you have room to keep them all. I have a bad feeling about how things are going for Beau. Not understanding a language is one thing, but to not understand a language after being asleep in a fairy ring for who knows how long? I hope she figures this out before anything bad can happen. I'm going to bed before I pass out recording and send you a tape that's just hours of my snoring. Love you. Me.
Episode 3. And through the grapevine I have heard. Hello, Mera. What I learned in Ireland, as well as from my studies prior to leaving home and my experience back in California, gave me quite a lot to think about. Culture is greatly influenced by language. I know, it's one of the only things I ever say, but it's true. Or, I suppose, they're interrelated more than one dependent on another. Language develops and evolves as culture develops and changes. And culture can evolve and morph as linguistics change. It's fascinating. That's why it intrigues me so much. I like to look at why and how the two affect each other, to learn for the future and discover things hidden in the past. I'll be the first to admit, the way Gaelic has been growing in a tank, rather than flourishing all across the country like one may have hoped, has me a little bit disheartened. I had high hopes to see how the system already long time implemented in the society could affect it. But what worked or didn't work in one place doesn't mean much for the long run everywhere. I've decided to seek some guidance from long-dead languages. I'm in Rome right now, so I figured I may as well brush up on the history of Latin while I'm here. I'm actually touring the popular sites in the country. It isn't tourist season, so I figured I'd have a chance to see all the neat sites while I'm here with a little less hassle than I would during busier months. So far, it hasn't been bad for a tourist with little knowledge of Italian. I don't have you to translate, so it's been a bit harder going than I would have liked, perhaps, but still lovely. Latin. Right. So, of course, aspects of the language live on even after the language dies, mostly in names of people and places. But in this case, in other languages too. Latin-based languages, at least the big three, are French, Spanish, and Italian. If you understand one, because of their shared roots, you can probably understand at least a portion of one of the others. In that sense, the memory of the language keeps it alive. However, and this part is rather interesting, people actually debate as to whether or not the language is actually dead. Because the language is still spoken in the Vatican, it isn't uncommon to hear close to the heart of the city itself. And many terms are used every day otherwise, at least in English-speaking countries, such as per capita, alter ego, and even etc. The language itself may not be incredibly common, but depending on how many people speak it, it may be more popular than some language recognized as living today. Forgive me, I'm gonna think out loud for a minute. Why did it survive? Linguicide has affected many languages. Since imperialists first decided to teach, quote, savages, unquote, big quotation marks around teach there too, from the societies they take over. In the case of Latin, the Romans were the native speakers and the imperialists in this case. However, Latin was not forced upon those conquered by the empire, I believe. In fact, from what I can gather, the Romans themselves spoke Greek because it was considered a language of prestige. So why did it survive? I have to wonder if it could stem from the language's origin. I remember my grandfather telling me, ages ago, that the few literate Europeans did their best to write in classical Latin, though as their speech evolved nation by nation, the written word would change to match. Words merged, more and less terms were used, different words substituted their originals, then those words evolved or smushed together. Regions used different terms that then followed the aforementioned patterns, and then as those regions conquered other regions, their dialect was spread to form languages like French, Spanish, and Italian. Even those languages still have their sublanguages of sorts, like Sicilian or Neapolitan. Yes, Neapolitan like the ice cream. These countries, in a way, keep the language alive with their own language, as it was once part of the same tongue. Common words or phrases between the languages seem like something that could be based in Latin. Another factor, maybe, is also the use of Latin in music, particularly classical music. Classical music uses plenty of Latin terms: forte, pianissimo, crescendo and decrescendo, cantabile, and more. I suppose an interest in music could lead to an interest in the language for the sake of a better understanding of the music. I can imagine it would be incredibly useful to musicians in that way. Knowing how many musicians there are in the world, in retrospect, may help to explain the survival more than I originally thought. No matter. It survived, and now we can look to it for ideas for the future. I think that this was a rare case for a language. In all honesty, regardless of exactly how Latin made it to where it is today, it is an anomaly. Once a language dies, how much interest is there in reviving it? Perhaps some wish to learn it for the sake of translating artifacts, sure. But only if there are artifacts to be found in need of translation. It begs the question, how useful could this be for anything else? Other languages, that is. Would the integrated use of a language in association with certain terms help keep it interest in it enough to keep it alive? Imagine, if you will, that everywhere around the globe said stove when they were talking about a stove, and cabinet when talking about cabinets. No translation into the language being spoken otherwise, just English kitchen terms used to describe kitchen objects. Would a dedicated chef take up the language to know the meaning of the words, so they could find what they need to utilize easier? Would a home designer learn it, to know what they are putting where in a kitchen by name alone? I can't say if they would. The example sounds a little crazy, I know. But English is still a very much thriving language. It isn't very hard at all to picture people speaking it globally because I don't have to picture it when it's already true. I don't know how successful a similar form of integration would be if it were a language very few had heard of before. The word would just become accepted, and people would move on. I think that if we want to preserve languages, we have to strike up an interest in the community that would speak it beforehand. I do think we should at least try and strike up an interest, though. People should get the chance to know the tongue of the land they're in, if they wish. And the way to be able to grant them that chance is by keeping the language alive in the first place. Oh my! Oh, look at the time. I've been going on for far too long. I'm sorry. You know, I just get caught up in, well, the thick of it all, I suppose. Let me tell you a bit about my day instead. Ah, what a lovely day I had in the city. I walked around for ages, just basking in the architecture. I got to see some museums, try some absolutely heavenly food, and, best of all, I made friends with another tourist. Her name is Leela, and she is, funnily enough, traveling the same route I am. We were able to chat a bit over some espresso earlier and talked about our plans for our trips. It's just been so nice to sit down and talk with someone for a little while about a shared interest. I hope you find someone to chat with while you're traveling too, Mera. It's nice, especially with how lonely travel has been without my best gal. I think I'd like to send you some music with every tape I send. I think it's a way for me to share what I'm giving with where I travel beyond just what my words can express. Here's today's piece. Right. Okay. I hope you're somewhere comfortable. The story today feels like it's going to be a bit of a doozy. So Bo is now in this town she is yet to learn the name of, wandering through the hustle and bustle with an ecstatic air, the energy radiating off of her, just palpable. Bo was more than excited to start learning what she could about the town she had wandered to. After just ages of yearning to travel and explore, sitting through years of boring language and culture classes and rigorous training, she was finally out in the world, seeing everything it had to offer. And hopelessly lost. She walked for a bit, looking for signposts, but everything was in a language she didn't understand. So she walked some more. And some more. And some more. After a full day of traveling, Bo was ready to find an inn and sleep. Lost in how twisted up she was, Bo bumped into someone while she wasn't paying attention. "Oh, pardon me," Bo said. The stranger she had bumped into gave her a dirty look, then said something in a language she recognized but couldn't name. "Watch it, punk," was the gist of what the stranger said. As they walked past, Bo identified the language as Florian. The language that she had thought she remembered as a small kingdom outside of the one her home belonged to. And while Bo supposed that she could not have been the only traveler seeking to go past her home, it struck her as odd to see that language spoken so far from the kingdom to which it belonged. Especially since the way the stranger spoke had been so strange, so different from what she had been taught. It sounded very slurred and incredibly informal for speaking to a stranger. She shook off the thought and started her trek again. As she walked, Bo began to notice that it seemed everyone she heard around her spoke Florian. The shopkeeps and their shoppers, children playing that she passed, beggars on street corners. The further Bo walked, the less it seemed like an odd occurrence than something on a different level entirely. And the Florian they spoke was weird, a mumbled version that the first stranger had spoken. As a child of the Lapsai kingdom, Bo learned the history of her home. She learned neighboring kingdoms, rules of diplomacy, languages, traditions, and more, all based on who was teaching her what they preferred to teach. Everyone taught what they thought was important to whatever children they could wrangle up that day. So, Bo knew a lot about a lot of things. Which is why she couldn't understand why everyone around her spoke as though they were within a kingdom hundreds of miles away. Bo took a moment to mentally go over the basics of the language that she remembered being taught, then approached a nearby stand. "Pardon me," Bo said. "Where might I find the nearest place in which to rest?" The shopkeep gave her a look, potentially at how formal and odd the way she spoke seemed to them. "You can find the closest inn at the corner of Why Should I Care and Bother Someone Else." Bo blinked for a moment, processing the response. The shopkeep's scowl grew the longer she stood there digesting how positively rude the stranger was, while the person running the stall next door scolded Mr. Rude, as Bo had mentally dubbed him. "Jameson, don't you be rude to this kind young lady just because she happens to be new in town." Bo continued to call this Jameson fellow Mr. Rude in her head, and watched as he seemed to shy away from the scrutiny as the person berating him turned their attention to Bo. "I'm awful sorry about him, miss. He seems to have some sort of personal vendetta against folks not from round here. The inn's just down the road to the left, then make a right and it should be right there. If you need anything else round here while you're staying, just come back to Leroy's shop, stand number 74. The person tips his hat to Bo as he says, "I'm Leroy, and you might be?" "If it pleases you to do so, call me Bo." Leroy's lips quirk up as he smiles. "Nice to meet you, if it pleases you to do so, Bo." She smiles in return, and, nodding once at Mr. Rude, Bo walks towards the end. After a long day of confusion and travel, she was ready for a nap. I, too, am ready for a nap. It's been a long day on my end, with more long days to come. And I can't wait for them. I hope you feel the same, wherever you end up, Mera. Love, me. Around the World from Me to You is brought to you as my personal project. The voice of Theiss is, well, me. The voice of Mera is Caroline Kondak. Music is Danlsan, Free With You, and Ryan Little, Lucy's Song. If you have interest in dying languages, I encourage you to look into them. There's a lot of history there, and it can be quite interesting to learn about. Keep it up.